Welcome to the story of one of the most important struggles in modern history, the American Civil Rights Movement. It's a story of bravery, determination, and an unyielding fight for justice and equality. For centuries, African Americans in the United States faced oppression and discrimination. From the days of slavery to the era of Jim Crow laws, racial inequality was deeply ingrained in American society. Even after the 13th Amendment ended slavery in 1865, segregation and voter suppression kept African Americans as second-class citizens, especially in the South. Public spaces, schools, and even water fountains were divided by race under the idea of separate but equal. But in reality, it was far from equal. The fight for civil rights wasn't new, but the 1950s and 1960s became a turning point. Activists, inspired by leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells, began pushing harder for change. In 1954, the landmark Supreme Court case, Brown v. Board of Education, declared school segregation unconstitutional. It was a huge victory, but it faced fierce resistance. Southern states tried to block integration, sparking protests and demands for justice. In 1955, a quiet act of defiance changed everything. Rosa Parks, a seamstress in Montgomery, Alabama, refused to give up her bus seat to a white passenger. Her arrest ignited the Montgomery bus boycott. For over a year, African Americans refused to use the city's buses. This movement, led by a young preacher named Martin Luther King Jr., showed the power of nonviolent protest. The boycott ended in victory as segregation on buses was ruled unconstitutional. But this was just the beginning. The 1960s saw new waves of activism. In 1960, college students began sit-ins, peacefully occupying whites-only lunch counters and demanding service. These simple acts of courage spread across the South. In 1961, the Freedom Riders, groups of black and white activists, rode buses into the South to challenge segregation in interstate travel. They were met with violence, but their bravery drew national attention to the cause. One of the most iconic moments of the civil rights movement came in 1963, during the March on Washington. Over 250,000 people gathered in the nation's capital to demand jobs and freedom. It was here that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, calling for a future where people would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The fight for civil rights wasn't without tragedy. Activists faced constant threats, arrests, and even death. In 1963, a church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama, killed 4 young girls, shocking the nation. Despite the violence, the movement pressed on. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, which banned segregation in public places. A year later, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, outlawing discriminatory practices that kept African Americans from voting. While the civil rights movement achieved major legal victories, the fight for equality didn't end there. Poverty, systemic racism, and inequality continued to affect African Americans. Leaders like Malcolm X emphasized black pride and self-determination, while organizations like the Black Panther Party fought against police brutality and economic injustice. The civil rights movement changed America forever. It proved that ordinary people, united in their fight for justice, could achieve extraordinary change. Today, its legacy lives on in ongoing struggles for equality. Whether it's addressing racial injustice, police reform, or voting rights, the movement reminds us that the fight for a fair and just world is never over. Thank you for watching this documentary. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more powerful stories about the fight for justice and equality.